And now, to open prime time in Ottawa, please welcome Reynolds Mastin, President and CEO of the Canadian Media Producers Association.
This is my third time doing this, and I just never get tired of that entrance. Thank you, and welcome to the 23rd edition of Prime Time in Ottawa, and welcome those of you who are joining us via our live stream, powered by the Canada Media Fund, our returning grand patron sponsor. I'd also like to thank Netflix, which is also supporting Prime Time as a grand patron sponsor, and a returning patron sponsor and lead government partner, Telefilm Canada, which is sponsoring this morning's breakfast. Finally, thank you to our platinum sponsors, Eagle Vision and SIM. Prime Time would not be possible without all of your generous support. Before beginning, I'd like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. To get things off on the right note, I'd like to start by making a Prime Time promise that at no point on this stage over the next 2 days will I talk about the tweets, adventures, and misadventures of the current occupant of the White House. I don't know about you, but I need a break. And besides, more than enough has transpired over the past year, both in our industry and our country, that is every bit as seismic as the US election and its continued aftershocks. Let's start with harassment. By far the most serious issue the industry has faced this year. Let me say right off the bat that I don't for a moment claim to speak for women or anyone who has experienced harassment. All that I can do today is talk about the steps we at the Cmpa are taking in collaboration with our industry partners to effect change. In bringing reprehensible behavior into the light, the brave women and men who have come forward in the past few months are leading a major cultural shift in what is considered acceptable conduct in the workplace. But more than that, they're empowering women in our industry to find their collective voice. These are all unequivocally good things. Like many turning points in history, the world of just 1 year ago now seems like a strange alternate universe. A universe where professional life for too many of our colleagues included regularly facing sleazy and in some cases even sociopathic behavior. Some might say it shouldn't have taken a full-blown crisis for our industry to finally begin getting its act together to tackle the harassment issue seriously. But as we know, it's often in moments of crisis that new leaders emerge and real and lasting positive change happens. The good news is that this work is already well underway. It actually started long ago, thanks to the efforts of organizations like Women in View, Women in Film and Television, and Women in Communications Technology. They've led the way, and now the rest of us are catching up. Last November, I found myself in Actors Boardroom, where there was a staggeringly wide cross-section of the industry assembled. Why? To discuss how to end harassment on our sets and in our studios, offices, and boardrooms across the country. From that first meeting, we formed 3 working groups, each responsible for putting in place concrete steps to change the culture of our workplaces and establish a clear standard of conduct. This standard will apply to everyone, no matter who they are, where they work, or the role that they play in our sector. As we speak, a draft code of conduct is being finalized to move these efforts forward. On top of this, we are developing training programs and more effective reporting mechanisms to effectively address bad behavior when it happens and to prevent it from happening in the first place. These measures are obviously not enough, and we all need to continue listening to each other. But it's a start. At the Cmpa, I would particularly like to thank Marguerite Pigott and Liz Shorten for their outstanding leadership on this issue, and to our chair, Scott Garvey, for making this issue a top priority for our association. I also want to extend, on behalf of the entire industry, our appreciation to ACTRA for not only taking on the role of convener, but for its relentless efforts to ensure that we all work as expeditiously as possible to make change now. And that especially includes Teresa Tova, ACTRA's National Treasurer, and President David Sparrow. Both have been incredibly effective, speaking on our sector's collective behalf, and we thank them. Fortunately, we in the production industry are very used to collaborating on big initiatives for the common good. A couple of years ago, we at the Cmpa partnered with ACTRA to get Ontario to adopt legislation to protect child performers. And just last summer, an unprecedented coalition of producers, performers, directors, writers, and technicians, along with the organizations that represent them, and thousands of ordinary engaged citizens, campaigned to have the federal cabinet send back to the CRTC its group license renewal decisions for Bell, Chorus, and Rogers. The reason we did this was because the future of our domestic production industry, one of Canada's greatest success stories, was at stake. Fortunately, Minister Jolie and her cabinet colleagues heard us and have asked the CRTC to reconsider some aspects of its decision. The Commission is undertaking that review right now, and so I will refrain from arguing the substantive merits of our noble cause on this stage. There was, however, one lesson that many of us drew from last summer's campaign, a lesson that if we actually internalize it and act on it, may end up being more consequential in the long term than the final outcome of the Commission's reconsideration. And that lesson is this: when we work together as an industry, we collectively move forward for the greater good. When we don't, we lock ourselves into a destructive cycle of playing one zero-sum game after another. Some we may win, some we may lose, but in the meantime, we devote precious resources to fighting increasingly old and stale battles. Even worse, we then leave it to external forces to dictate our fate, rather than sitting down and solving our own problems. I'm certainly not the first to make this observation, let alone to act on it. A few years ago, Heather Conway, Lisa Clarkson, Rob Bromley, and Trina McQueen launched Dare to Agree, a visionary effort to create a forum where industry stakeholders could discuss issues of common interest, identify common positions, and speak with one voice. While it enjoyed some early momentum, I do think that in some ways it was an initiative that may have been just slightly ahead of its time. We saw, for example, that when Minister Jolie launched her Everything is on the Table review of federal cultural policy, there was very little collaboration by the industry at large. Partly this was a function of the scale and scope of the review and the severe time constraints we were all working under. But we are shortly going to be given another opportunity, one where we can show the government that we have a collective vision about how to modernize our legislative toolkit in a way that embraces the digital shift, ensures that every part of our sector remains healthy and strong, and which serves the needs of all Canadians. That opportunity is Minister Jolie's upcoming review of the Broadcasting and Telecommunications Acts. In a sense, the review has already started through the direction the minister issued to the CRTC to provide her with a report on the future of digital business models and distribution. In the coming weeks, the minister will launch her own formal consultation process. When she does so, each stakeholder is going to have to decide whether it's going to look to the health of the broader ecosystem in which it operates, or whether it will decide to solely focus on its own narrow interests. Looking to the larger picture means not only recognizing, but embracing the fact that how we do business and the government tools that support that business need to change. Not overnight, and not in a way that imposes needless disruption in an industry that is already facing and adapting to disruption on an unprecedented scale. But if our approach is to try to recreate the halcyon days of 1993, or 2013, or even 2018, we will set ourselves up for failure. Our hope and expectation is that Canadian broadcasters, for example, will ask themselves how they can best work with their producer suppliers in a way that everybody wins. Based on recent deals I'm seeing, few of our broadcaster partners appear to be asking themselves that question today. But at the same time, we as producers need to ask ourselves how we can help ensure that Canadian broadcasters are best positioned to compete against the foreign OTT giants that are operating in our territory, and that is our obligation to do. Finally, our entire industry needs to find the right balance that allows us to maximize the use of Canadian creative talent while also meeting the new demands of the global marketplace. Some people in this room will find what I just said threatening. It's not intended to be. Everyone must be willing to ask uncomfortable questions in order to find the right answers. And we have to start trying to answer those questions together. We need to strike a new regulatory bargain. Now, we're not going to figure out all of this at prime time, but we can start. Maybe in order to achieve some big collective ambitions, we need to start small. Maybe as simple as having coffee or a drink here at prime time with someone from the other side. After all, some great shows have been born downstairs at the Shore Club, so why not some great ideas that will take our entire sector to the next level? I'm also pleased that the Cmpa has partnered with an incredibly wide coalition of creators, producers, broadcasters, and workers in the creative industries to file an application with the CRTC to combat internet piracy. I know that there are some who will oppose any measures, no matter how necessary or reasonable, to combat the ongoing wide-scale theft of intellectual property. But I also know that the vast majority of Canadians want to have a country where our children can see a future for themselves as the next Drake or Alessia Cara, the next Sarah Polley or Jay Baruchel, the next Jean-Marc Vallée or Denis Villeneuve. But even here, instead of declaring war against those who disagree with us, let's use this application to launch a dialogue about how we can ensure that creators get paid for their work so that audiences can continue to enjoy new content that they will love. Speaking of controversial topics, let's talk about the Netflix deal for a moment. Minister Jolie's announcement last September of the 5-year, $500 million deal sparked both enormous interest and controversy. The reaction to it completely overshadowed other elements of the minister's Creative Canada framework, including the important stopgap funding for the CMF, needed to bolster our sector as we adapt to the ongoing digital shift. As for the Netflix deal itself, I'd like to propose a prime time truce. As some of you may recall, I've occasionally said things on this stage that were not entirely aligned with Netflix's own public policy positions. 2 years ago, this led to a Cmpa board resolution that I'm no longer allowed to insult sponsors in my opening remarks. In protest, I threatened to no longer do an opening speech at prime time. This did not seem to produce the desired effect. So I'd now like to take this opportunity to extend my own deep personal gratitude to Netflix for being a grand patron level sponsor of Primetime this year. And I look forward to seeing all of you here at Primetime 2019. I'm also pleased to report that having just read their very thoughtful and well-written submission to the CRTC in its Section 15 review of the future of our industry, that the CMPA and Netflix remain as far apart as ever on the big issues of the day. But that's okay. We can agree to disagree on whether sovereign countries should be able to determine their own cultural destiny, or if this would be better dictated by foreign multinationals headquartered in Los Angeles, or say, Seattle. The important thing is to begin having a thoughtful dialogue about the future and to have that dialogue together. This also means ensuring that everyone has a voice in shaping what the future looks like. Last year on this stage, I urged all of us to get behind the creation of an Indigenous Screen Office. This year, I'm pleased to report that not only has this come to pass, but that the director of the new ISO will be joining us at prime time and will be on this stage later today. And many of you need no introduction to Jesse Wente. Not only was he our closing speaker on the stage last year, but he long ago earned a reputation as one of the most respected voices in our industry, whether talking about the state of Canadian cinema or the contribution of Indigenous creative talent to our collective future. Jesse will be on the stage later today, and we can't wait to see what he does in his new role. Collaborative efforts like the ISO give me optimism for the future. And while our industry finds itself confronting serious risks and challenges, when you look at the next generation of creative talent, including producing talent, my optimism only grows. To name but one example, as we were putting together our latest edition of Indie Screen, it became clear that not only is the next generation of producer an ambidextrous blend of brilliant creator and business-savvy entrepreneur, but that it's a generation led by women who decide that instead of waiting for change to happen, they would make change happen instead. But while there's no question that this next generation of women are forging new and exciting paths, the truth is, it's always been that way. They, and we, are the beneficiaries of previous generations of women who also confronted sexism, racism, even harassment, including sexual harassment, so that they could make their own contributions to our industry and our country. I cannot imagine what my own professional trajectory would have been like without the example, mentorship, and guidance of so many women leaders, some in positions of power, others who should have been, and many of whom are in this room today. They may not even realize that they have been role models to both women and men, and that we stand on their collective shoulders today. So, as we grapple with the difficult issues that lay ahead of us, let's do so with open minds and open hearts, and a profound sense of gratitude. Gratitude that we are finally shining a light on the dark corners of our industry and are determined to make a decisive break with the past. Gratitude that we are taking steps to ensure that everyone has a voice and a stake in our collective future. And most of all, gratitude that we get a chance to contribute, to leave a legacy, to continue to build our industry and our country. And now on with the program.